I think every camper needs a good cast iron pan. So today we're going to discuss why you need one, some tips for buying it, some do's and don'ts, and then of course, some delicious things that you can cook with your cast iron pan at camp. 3 reasons that a cast iron pan is perfect for camping. First up is this thing is so versatile, meaning you can use this one pan over the campfire and over a camp stove. So you don't need to pack multiple pieces of gear to use in those different scenarios. This one pan can be used in both. I love that. There's limited space when it comes to packing. And so I want pieces of gear that I can use in more than one scenario. So I use this thing all the time over my propane camp stove. And then I also cook over a campfire with the cast iron. So super versatile. Number 2 is that this is incredibly durable. This is an antique cast iron pan and it's about 100 years old. So if you take good care of this, which caring for this is not hard, it's going to last a lifetime and beyond. I love to think about who was using this pan and what they were cooking and where they were cooking it. It's just really cool that these pans can last so long. The 3rd reason is heat retention. So once cast iron gets hot, it stays hot. And this is great for cooking outdoors where you have some variables that are a little bit harder to control, like a campfire, for example. That's going to produce maybe a little bit more of an uneven heat, and cooking with cast iron is going to kind of help counteract that and give you that nice even heat. Same with even a camp stove. It can be hard to control that heat, especially if it's windier. And so a cast iron pan is really, I think, just the way to go in most scenarios. Now, if I've convinced you to get a cast iron pan for your camping trips, let's talk a little bit about buying one. So there are many brands on the market. We have Lodge, Camp Chef, Bare Bones Living. All those pans I think are fine. They're pretty much the same in my opinion. Like I said here, I have a antique cast iron pan. I collect cast iron. I think it's so cool to find a pan that's 100 years old and be able to still use it today. Another reason to consider an antique pan is these are fairly common and easy to find at an antique store. They're not that expensive. I think I paid $80 for this, and I think that was probably a little over, but it was in really good condition and I didn't have to do much to restore it. So that's kind of a con with an antique pan, is you might have to restore it. But the pro is that they're really smooth. So this is a Griswold pan and it is smooth on the inside. And when they made these, I don't know the proper terminology, but they smoothed it out. And if you look at a more modern pan, it has a little bit more of a texture to it, and that's not necessarily bad. The smoother your surface is, the more non-stick that it's going to be. So that's something to consider when it comes to buying your cast iron pan, and we're going to talk about ways to make it non-stick coming up. So that's not, I wouldn't say that's a deal breaker or anything, but that's just something that is a pro when it comes to buying these antique pans. And there's so many resources online on how to restore them and how to season them properly. Now, when it comes to trying to find antique pans, it is definitely recommended that you do a little bit of research beforehand at home so that you know what are good quality pans that you want to even be looking for. So for example, if I go to an antique store and I see a nice cast iron pan, but there's no way for me to figure out who made it and when, that's just not something that I'm going to buy, because I want to know the quality of what I'm buying. I want to know who made it. So for me, I collect Griswold cast iron pans. Wagner is another very popular brand that people collect. So just do a little bit of research at home to kind of discover what are some of the brands that you want to look for, and then also what is good condition. So you don't waste your time on pans that you can't identify and that are in really poor condition. For sizing, this is a 10-inch Dutch oven if I'm measuring from the rim to the rim, so not including the handle. This is 10 inches, and I find that this is a great size for pretty much everything that I need for me and Nick. I typically am cooking 2 to 4 people. I think a 12-inch would be great if you have a bigger group, but the bigger you get, the harder it's gonna fit on that camp stove. So that's just something to consider. But I think that a 10-inch pan or a 12-inch pan will be great for camping. You could probably even go smaller if you don't cook for too many people, but the 10-inch has been very versatile and and I haven't really had any desire to go bigger than this. Now that you have your cast iron pan, I want to share 7 tips for using it and getting the most out of it when it comes to camping. So first up is to make sure that it has a good seasoning on it. The seasoning is this dark layer of polymerized oil that protects your pan from rust, and it also gives it a good non-stick surface. So the seasoning is important. I really think the seasoning can kind of make or break a pan. The pans that you buy nowadays from Lodge or Camp Chef or Bare Bones, they all come pre-seasoned and ready for use. Raw iron is more of a silver color and it will rust pretty much right away. So a lot of the pans come seasoned. Now, if you go the antique route, you might have to actually strip the pan down to the raw iron and then re-season it so that it can be used. It really just depends on the condition of the pan. The more that you cook with your pan, especially with fats, the better that the seasoning is going to get over time. So it's just one of those things that gets better and better the more that you use it. Tip number 2 is to preheat your pan slowly. So when I am at home, I will put my pan on and I will preheat it on a low heat. I start my pan and then I will do things around the kitchen like unload the dishwasher, get other things prepared for the meal that I'm going to cook, but I really try to take the time to let my pan preheat. Now, when I'm out camping, I still try to preheat it. If your pan is smoking, then you are preheating it too high. So it really should be a pretty low to medium heat, and you don't want your pan to be smoking. Number 3 is to make sure you're protecting your hands and your arms from the heat. I know this is incredibly obvious, but it's worth mentioning because I have burnt my hand pretty bad on cast iron. Luckily, I was at home and not out in the middle of nowhere. You can just have a moment where you forget. I took the pan out of the oven. I was cooking some brownies in here because I cook in this, I bake in this, I pretty much try to do almost everything in my pan. I took it out of the oven, it was at 400 degrees, and I put it on the top of my stove. And then just moments later, I went to grab the pan and move it to the side, and I just put my hand right on that 400 degree cast iron. And it hurt, to say the least. It was very painful. Couldn't sleep that night. It was just crazy how much that hurts. And so if you are out camping and that happens, where your resources to care for that are much more limited, you just want to make sure that you're taking a lot of care when it comes to the heat of these pans, because they get really hot and they stay hot like we've talked about. So making sure that you have proper gloves to handle the cast iron, pot holders, things to protect your arms and your body if you're cooking over the fire. Another thing to note is that if you are cooking and you take it off the heat and you set it aside, maybe you know it's hot, but making sure that everyone around camp also knows it's hot, especially little kids that might come over and grab the pan by accident if it's just sitting on a table. So making sure that you have all the things to protect your hand, to protect the pan from yourself and also other people accidentally touching it. Now, speaking of heat, tip number 4 is to make sure that all of your utensils and the things that you're going to be using to mix and to cook can also withstand the heat. So no plastic when it comes to cooking in general around camp. I just don't bring any plastic utensils and things like that. I use some metal spatulas, which I often get comments, people telling me, don't use metal on your pan, you're gonna scrape the seasoning off. And I think that's a bit of a myth. The seasoning on this pan is very strong because I use this all the time, and a little metal spatula that I'm using to flip a pancake isn't going to rip my seasoning off. You don't want to come in here with a sharp metal knife and start scraping at your pan. That'll probably chip your seasoning off. But in general, I like to use wooden utensils to mix things up, and then a little metal spatula to flip pancakes, for example, or mix my eggs up. And that works really well. But just make sure whatever utensils that you're using, they can withstand high heat. Tip number 5 is to let your pan cool naturally. So once you're done cooking, just set your pan aside and it will eventually come down to the temperature of the air pretty much. And that's it. You don't want to try to rapidly cool your pan. I don't really know why you would do this, but I mean, if you're cooking and then you put your pan in snow or dunk your pan in cold water, what happens is that can actually warp the cast iron and cause cracks. So you don't want to do that. Just let your pan cool naturally. Tip number 6 is to keep cleaning simple. Now, when I am cooking just basic things like pancakes or eggs, I am done cooking and I'll just maybe wipe out any excess butter that's in here. I also will sometimes put a little bit of salt in the pan, coarse salt, with a paper towel, and just kind of use the salt to break off any food bits that are stuck on the pan, and then just pour the salt in the paper towel in the garbage. And that's kind of basic everyday cleaning. If I am cooking something in here that has a much more stronger flavor, let's say salmon or bacon, I might want to go in with a little bit of water and a scrub brush and get that off. I have a full video on how I clean it a little bit deeper, but in general, I don't use soap, just use a little bit of warm water and a somewhat gentle scrub brush. You don't want to come in here with like steel wool or anything too abrasive, again, because you don't want to get that seasoning off of the pan, but just something that's going to get those food bits off. A little bit of water, rinse it off, and that's kind of the basics of cleaning deeper. But in general, keep it simple. It really doesn't need a lot of cleaning. Just wipe out any excess oil and use the salt method for simple on-the-go camping cleaning. If you do clean with water, just make sure that you wipe your pan dry completely when you're done. You don't want it to be wet when you're storing it, because again, that can lead to rust and just kind of ruining your pan. My last tip is to use your pan at home too. This is such an easy way to get acquainted with your pan, to understand how to cook with cast iron, how your pan functions in different scenarios, get comfortable cleaning it. Use it at home as much as you possibly can. Like I've said so many times, this is like my go-to pan at home. We actually have 2 of these pans, but we use these all the time at home. I bake in these, I cook in these. It's just so nice to have this one pan that has so many uses. So get comfortable using it at home. You'll really get a sense of how it holds heat, how high you need to have the heat for certain things, and it will make camp cooking a lot easier. So now that you have your pan and you're excited to use it, these are some of my favorite things to cook at camp with the cast iron pan. So for breakfast, what I do most often is pancakes and scrambled eggs. That is a go-to for me. It can all be cooked in one pan and it's super easy. Very minimal cleanup. I also love breakfast burritos, where I'll cook all of the egg mixture and anything else I want to put in there, set that aside on a plate, assemble the burritos, and then put the burritos back in the pan and melt the cheese and get that nice crispy outer edge on the burritos. For lunches and dinners, we have grilled cheese. That is such a fun one, really easy to cook at camp, and a lot of different ways that you can change it up. I love adding a little pesto. Ooh, so good. And then we have quesadillas, another one that's very easy. I also have done grilled steak fajitas, where I grilled the steak over the fire and then I put a bunch of peppers and onions in my cast iron pan and cook that over the fire as well in the pan. And then you just kind of assemble everything into these delicious fajitas. Sloppy joes are a great one pan camping dinner that I serve with a little bit of coleslaw, and then any sort of stir fry. So I have done a shrimp and veggie stir fry that was really delicious, all in this cast iron pan. For dessert, a really fun idea is just easy skillet s'mores. Now for this one, I have a much smaller cast iron pan because I don't know, I can't eat a whole 10-inch skillet worth of s'mores. But if there are fire restrictions and you can't have a fire and make traditional s'mores, this is a really fun way to still have that s'mores element, but it's something that you can cook over the camp stove in a small little cast iron pan. As you can see, the cast iron pan is incredibly versatile, can be used in so many different scenarios, and you really can cook complete meals in just this cast iron pan. So camp cooking does not have to be overwhelming. You don't need a ton of gear. I always recommend getting a good cast iron pan as a starting point because, as I just showed you, you can cook so many things here. One pan to rule them all. And so if you have any additional questions, let me know in the comments below. Share your cast iron tips or your favorite things to cook in your cast iron pan, and make sure to hit subscribe. So I'll see you in the next video.